And now, influence squandered. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Now, during 2020, all we heard was how important it was to restore America's leadership position in the world, and that only Joe Biden had the experience and the credibility to do this.
Joe Biden is probably the most experienced foreign policy expert since George H.W. Bush.
President-elect Biden is doing everything that he can to reassure the world that American global leadership is coming back.
He's thinking about global leadership, about how to keep everybody safe.
Joe Biden will restore our battered standing in the world because he knows that our true strength comes from setting an example that the world wants to follow.
Oh my God, watching it. But what we've seen in 14 months is a series of unsteady moves from an unstable chief executive. And we're also stuck with the vice president, who literally has zero talent and zero relevant experience at a time and place that requires a great deal of both. So did White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain actually think that sending Kamala Harris to Poland would somehow intimidate Vladimir Putin? The woman who speaks as if she's narrating a Sesame Street sketch?
I am here, standing here on the northern flank, on the eastern flank, talking about what we have in terms of the eastern flank and our NATO allies, and what is at stake at this very moment. What is at stake this very moment are some of the guiding principles around the NATO alliance.
If only the translator could have told us what President Duda of Poland was really thinking when listening to her drone on in the tutorial. Now, the fact is, as this third-rate band of radicals bluster on about zero carbon emissions and the global equity agenda, other nations, including our so-called allies, are busy pursuing their own interests. Just a few years ago, they had to contend with a different type of American president who knew how he wasn't afraid to flex our muscle and our economic might when necessary, who knew how to do that. And
I have been very, very direct with Secretary Stoltenberg and members of the alliance in saying that NATO members must finally contribute their fair share and meet their financial obligations. But 23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States.
what a different world we're living in now. NATO members are generally aligned against Russia, but only because the Europeans have belatedly realized their danger. Certainly not because of anything that Biden or his team in Blinken did. Every recent action they took against Putin is in their own geopolitical interest. And when the Biden team suggested that they stop buying Russian energy, Germany said no. Germany needs Russian oil and gas, and frankly, I don't care what Joe Biden thinks. There once was a time when an American president called, our allies would listen, or at least they'd pay attention. Now they're just tuning Biden's team out altogether. Now take India, supposedly the centerpiece of our diplomacy in the Indo-Pacific region. India refused to condemn the Ukraine invasion at the United Nations despite our lobbying. Now, if India is worried about offending anyone, it seems they're most worried about offending Russia, while also keeping an eye on China's ever-looming presence. They certainly don't care about what Joe Biden thinks. The Biden team's so-called diplomacy is nothing more than a series of photo ops. It certainly never yields any results. Take Saudi Arabia. Now, under Trump, diplomacy over years was deft enough to produce the Abraham Accords. Well, looks like Biden has squandered that working relationship as well.
The Journal is reporting that Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman declined a request to speak with President Biden recently.
That report is inaccurate, so let me start there. The president did speak with the Saudi king just a few weeks ago, several weeks ago.
This is totally humiliating. They wouldn't take his call. Now think about it. The Saudi government is literally too busy to answer Biden's call. We have never seen anything like this. I mean, at least maybe not since 1979 or so. Now, veteran negotiators who really wanted to help the Ukrainians, instead of simply trying to move the Poles at home, they would recognize that the only practical way to stop this invasion now is by getting China's President Xi to stop Putin. Because without China's help on trade, Russia couldn't sustain its barbaric and inhumane assault against Ukrainian cities. But to the CCP, the Biden team is just little more than a joke at this point. And I've got to say, who can blame them for thinking that? Because for years, Biden was a cheerleader for the CCP. His climate czar and his Treasury Secretary are still on Team China. In fact, today, we learned that Biden is rewarding China by delaying a key trade investigation, which would have been the trigger for tariffs like those Trump had put in place. So the pro-China forces in the administration at Treasury and Commerce, they won out, as we predicted they would, signaling more weakness to Beijing. So why would China ever take America seriously when our own government is so easy to intimidate? China lied about COVID, China's supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but Joe and his team, they just don't care. And poor old Secretary Blinken, I almost feel bad for him. Knowing his boss will never use or even look for leverage over China, he can only basically do wishful thinking diplomacy.
Spent about an hour on the phone with my counterpart, the Chinese foreign minister, the other day, and one of the things that I said to him is that, you know, China speaks often about the sanctity of this principle of sovereignty. We would expect China, based on everything it's said in the past, to stand up and make its voice heard.
Stand up and make your voice heard, China. It's more embarrassment. Now, if Biden was really the leader of a Democrat establishment and what they sold him as, he would have assembled a team of foreign policy realists who would have provided a frank assessment of the options available in Ukraine. They would have told him that the entire idea of a rules-based international order is folly when you have China and Russia smashing up your global playpen. But of course, Biden's never been a leader. He's been a glad-handing grifter, a creature of Washington, where so much of what passes as leadership is really just choreography. You got the big desk, you have the conference room, you have the lectern with the presidential seal. It's all props, zero substance. And in the real world, where serious people play for keeps, he has been measured and, well, found to be weak. No one, not one single bad guy on earth, fears Joe Biden. So the grown-ups, the countries who understand power and how the world really works, they'll make the key decisions in Ukraine. So the Europeans, the Russians, the Ukrainians, and the Chinese will be at the table. We'll just have to take whatever arrangement they eventually make. And after all, anyone who would send Kamala Harris to Eastern Europe at this moment in history cannot be taken seriously. And so they aren't. But someday America will again have a president who stands up for our interests. And someday we'll again have a cabinet filled with serious leaders who know how to use our leverage to make the world a better place. But that's not going to happen until after 2024. And in the meantime, America is going to continue to drift, as sad as it is to see. And the world will continue to become more dangerous. And that's the angle.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.